Hello students, I am Dr. Nimi Singh. Today I bring you a learning module in BSc Forensic Science on behalf of the content writers Dr. GSOD and Ms. Tulika Banerjee on an important unit of forensic ballistics, which is firearm evidence and part 4, in which we will discuss about country-made firearms, its importance in forensic science, its classification, components of country-made firearms along with its firing process. We will also discuss about identification of bullets, wads and pellets for country-made firearms. Let us start our episode with a look at what we are going to learn today. Let us start with the introduction of the topic, then we will study importance, classification, characteristics, firing process, coming to the identification of bullet, then comparison microscope in identification, examination of bullets, comparison of question bullet and sample bullet, and identification of wads is going to be the third topic, in which we are going to study the wad distribution, then identification of pellets, in which we are going to study the pellet patterns, and then in the last, the conclusion of what we have studied. The country-made firearms are improvised by the culprits from readily available materials, either personally or with the help of a local blacksmith. The demand for the improvised firearms has increased so much in recent times that there is considerable demand for these weapons in Uttar Pradesh, Bihar and in some other border states, and the demand is continuously increasing. The advent of the country-made firearms is a result of the stringent controls on the manufacture and sale of ammunition and also of the licensing policy for the firearms. No person in India can get a firearm license and keep a gun unless his name is cleared by the policy after the verification of his antecedents. Likewise, the ammunition can be purchased only by a firearm license holder, the quantity of which is again limited by an insertion in the firearm license itself. The culprits who need arms and ammunition, they tap the clandestine markets or they go in for the improvisations. The country-made firearms, as already seen, are the non-standard firearms. They are not tested or proved for their fireworthiness. The weapons, therefore, are usually imperfect contrivances which are highly dangerous even to those who use them. Besides, they are also not amenable to the standard techniques used for evaluating the forensic ballistic problems generated by them. Let us come to the importance now. The firearm equalizes the weak and the strong. They spell death to those against whom they are used. The possession of the weapon thus confers superiority to its possessor over those who do not possess them. They are therefore frequently used in the commission of crime, in settling scores with the opponents, or cowing down those who do not possess firearms, or to frighten the victims in crime situations. As the legal possession and legal trade is highly restricted, the needy clientele has to go in for the country-made firearm in a big way. So much so that in India, a fairly large percentage of firearms used in crimes is of the improvised variety. The percentage varies from state to state, from about 25% to over 50%. Therefore, these country-made firearms are of great importance in criminal investigation work. The country-made firearm involved in heinous crimes provide confirming linking evidence. The evidence has, however, to be evaluated properly. Formerly, only limited evaluations of the evidence were possible. Fortunately, over the past decades, new grounds have been broken, and these country-made firearms provide practically the same evidentiary value as is possible from the standard firearms. Now coming to the classification. The classification of country-made firearms cannot follow the classification practice of the standard factory-made firearms. They are classified with reference to the ammunition used in them. Thus, we have 12 bore firearm and 0.303 firearms. The former fires 12 bore cartridge and the latter the 0.303 cartridge. As the ammunition of the other types of firearm is not easily available and is very costly, country-made firearms for the other bores calibers are rare, though sometimes revolvers of the 0.32 and 0.38 calibers are also seen. The country-made firearms are also classified according to the manner in which they are fired. Thus, we have the shoulder firearm or the handguns. The country-made handguns are more popular as they can be conveniently concealed and carried. The country-made firearms by and larger have smooth bore barrels, though some handguns do carry rifling, often in a crude form to satisfy the purchaser than to improve the ballistics of the arm or ammunition. Coming to the characteristics, country-made firearms have the usual parts: the barrel, the action, the lock. Barrel. Country-made firearms have non-standard barrels. They are manufactured from pieces of iron or steel pipes used in the sanitary or electrical work. They are seldom manufactured by boring of the steel rods. The length of the barrel varies from about 10 centimeters to 25 centimeters in case of handguns and is about 60 centimeters in the shoulder firearms. The barrels of the discarded muzzle loading guns are also cut and used for the country-made 12 bore firearms. The following points are noteworthy about the barrels in such firearms. The diameter of the bore caliber seldom corresponds to that of a firearm. It varies from 1 centimeter to 2.5 centimeters usually. It may even vary from one point to another in the same barrel. The bore surface is seldom smooth. It may have been ridges and valleys and protrusions, pits, etc. The thickness of the barrel wall differs from one firearm to another. The barrels often have a welded seam to form a pipe made from a sheet, which is the weakest structural feature of the barrel. The barrels of the country-made firearms, which are intended to fire 0.303 cartridges, have the following noteworthy characteristics. The first, that is, there is no rifling in the barrel. Secondly, the diameter of the barrel varies from 7 to 13 millimeter, which is not uniform. The barrel is usually thick but varies from firearm to firearm. The bore surface is rough. It carries pits and protrusions, ridges and valleys. The barrels of the other bores or caliber country-made firearms have barrels characteristics which are similar to those mentioned above. The loose, rough and the non-uniform barrels are responsible for the varying ballistics performance of the ammunition from one shot to another. Now, improper materials, the presence of joints, protrusions, pits, etc. in the barrels make these weapons highly dangerous for the user. Interestingly, the weapon becomes less dangerous to the victims as the ammunition does not acquire the intended velocities. Both the aim and the range suffer drastically. However, they still remain highly dangerous at close ranges at which they are normally used. Chamber. The country-made firearms usually do not have specially made chambers. In most of them, the barrel end serves as a chamber and there is no special provision, lead or separation of the chamber from the barrel bore. Now, if the bore diameter is more than the diameter of the base of the cartridge, a special arrangement, which is some sort of adapter attached to the chamber end, is made to prevent the slippage of the cartridge into the barrel. In extremely crude weapons, the slippage is prevented by wrapping a piece of cloth or a paper around the cartridge tube. The chambers of the country-made firearms, if they exist, do not have the proper dimensions, nor do they have any arrangement for sealing the cartridge correctly. Consequently, the cartridge often rests in the chamber, which is an important factor for varying ballistics given by the same firearm from one shot to another. The loose chambers also cause cartridge bursts. A tight chamber imprints the chamber irregularities on the cartridge tube, which facilitates their identification, especially in those cases where the percussion cap has been pierced or blown off. Action. The hammer, trigger and the firing pin, that is the striker, are the important parts of the action mechanism. Often the hammer is cocked manually. It is held in the cocked position through a spring mechanism. When the trigger is pressed, it releases the hammer and the spring makes the hammer to strike the firing pin with a considerable force. The firing pin in turn is pushed forward and strikes the percussion cap, thus exploding the cartridge. The main distinguishing characteristics of the action are: the firing pin is more or less headless nail. In some cases, the head of the nail was also observed. It is propelled forward by the striking hammer and kept pushed in its new position. Often it is slightly longer than needed and pierces the percussion cap. Thus, gases leak backward. This reduces the forward propulsive forces and hence the velocity and the kinetic energy of the projectiles. The piercing of the cap complicates the identification of the firing pin mark on the cartridge case in respect of the firearm containing the firing pin. However, backward leakage of gases through the pierced hole permits better impact of the base of the cartridge with the breech face and hence better transfer of breech face marks on the base of the cartridge. As the breech face of the country-made firearm is crudely finished, it carries numerous irregularities which leave their marks on the cartridge case and are then exploited for the identification of the fired cartridge. But in some cases, the firing pin continues to be pressed against the cartridge as there is no spring action to take it back. In such cases, when the cartridge is being taken out, the protruding firing pin scraps the percussion cap and base of the cartridge. It creates the scrap marks which provide ample evidence to link the fired cartridge with the weapon from which the cartridge has been fired. It is against this background that the identification of a fired cartridge in respect of the used country-made firearm is often easier rather than difficult. The firing pin in country-made firearms can be easily replaced. The clever criminals have at times replaced the firing pin or mutilated its original surface characteristics also. The fraud, however, does not help much. The breech face marks provide the necessary identification data. The locking systems of the country-made firearms are notoriously unreliable. There is no proper barrel stock coupling system. The locking device is often a nail and a hole arrangement. In some cases, the overlapping of parts make them very unsafe. Often there is a gap between the breech block and the barrel. The gap promotes a cartridge burst. Coming to the firing process. The poor construction of the firearm, however, affects the firing process in the following ways. A longer and a non-retractable firing pin pierces the percussion cap of the cartridge. It adversely affects the initiation of the powder charge, modifying the intended use of the ammunition. Secondly, the gap between the breech face and base of the cartridge allows the backward movement of the cartridge. Sometimes the cartridge bursts and seriously affects the adequate burst and the development of adequate pressure, which in turn affects both the aim and range. The extent of the effect varies from firearm to firearm and even from one shot to another shot. Metallic pieces may fly when a cartridge bursts, injuring the shooter or bystanders. Thirdly, the oversized chambers promote lateral expansion, which affects the development of forward pressure. In some cases, the cartridge bursts, which seriously affects the ballistics of the ammunition. An oversized barrel bore allows the escape of the gases from the sides. It affects the ballistics of the process in the following ways. The gases escaping from the sides do not contribute towards the velocity of the projectiles. The kinetic energy of the projectiles is thus reduced. The escaping gases do not build up the pressure. It gives incomplete combustion. It reduces the velocity of the projectiles. The projectiles, due to the above reasons, have lower wounding powder. The oversized bore prevents a continuous bullet-bore contact. The random contact may or may not imprint adequate contact marks on the bullets for the bullet barrel linkage. In an undersized barrel, the bore of the weapon may burst, but it seldom happens. It is probably due to the incomplete combustion, backward movement of the cartridge, punctured cap, bursting of the cartridge itself, etc., which helps to prevent the firearm burst. The combustion of the powder charge of the ammunition meant for long barreled firearm is not complete in the short barreled country-made firearms. Consequently, the semi-burnt or unburnt powder particles in considerable amounts are also ejected along with the projectiles and other ejecta. The incomplete combustion, it inhibits a complete and proper development of pressure. The projectiles therefore do not acquire standard velocities or striking energies. The wounding powder of the projectile fired from a country-made firearm is considerably reduced. The country-made firearms do not have rifling. The projectiles fired from them therefore do not acquire a spin. The aim and range are consequently seriously affected even when the bullets fired are of standard rifle ammunition. As the semi-burnt or unburnt powder particles are also hurled along with the other ejecta, the powder range may thus increase. The data of a standard firearm do not hold good for the country-made firearms. The rough bore surface may scrap the metal particles from the projectiles. They travel to a greater distance than those in standard firearm and may give false estimates of the ranges if the data of the standard firearm is used for range determination. In an excessively large bore, the bullets may get dent due to striking against the barrel walls at an angle. The dents on bullets may mislead the investigator as the dents on bullet which are also due to ricochet. In both the oversized and undersized bore barrels, the wads may get damaged or marked in a particular fashion. The change in characteristics may help in the wad firearm linkage.